Okay, so this is chapter 22, section 1, historical political systems. The feudal society. The feudal system is the basic government and society in Europe during the Middle Ages. It was based around the feudal system. Small communities were formed around the local lord and the manor. The lord owned the land and everything in it. He would keep the people safe in return for their service. The lord, in turn, would provide the king with soldiers or taxes. Feudalism was a loosely organized system of rule in which powerful lords divided up their land among other lesser lords. It was based on a series of relationships between the more powerful and the less powerful. Only individuals at the very top of the system had a say in how the system worked. In a system so divided between rich and poor, the peasants were the ones who felt the disadvantages of feudalism. Serfs made a subsistence living in which they had to forfeit virtually everything to keep their homes. The serfs also had no rights or independence, and as more sophisticated economy developed, feudal governments had to adapt to a changing world. So this picture is just like a basic picture of how it works. So the king, he owns the land and he owns everything, and he would distribute it amongst the nobles, who would then distribute it amongst the knights and then the peasants and so on. And most of this system was based upon the peasants or the serfs. They made up most of the population.
And I just want to make 2 points, and you did a fine job covering that historical evolution, but 2 things to keep in mind. A, prior to the conquering of Great Britain, the British Isles in 1066 by William the Conqueror, the vestiges left behind by the Romans and the Celtics was much more local and disjointed in terms of how people related to each other socially, politically, and economically. But when William the Conqueror came from Normandy, he's the one who fully instituted this feudal society. And the other thing that you noticed down in that Crystal mentioned about the peasants was a complete lack of individual rights, individual liberties, which you're going to see this fomenting and festering over a period of time as they transition into more nation states. And eventually it finds its release in colonial America, where we finally said, what? We're not going to take it anymore, and built into this new Constitution, we have what? A Bill of Rights. Finally, we found a resolution to centuries of top-down control by those who have both money and the power and the property. That's why I think you've got to be so careful about giving up your liberties and your rights for security, because you can see how hard it is to get it back once you lose it, right?
Well, I think I read that the serfs or the peasants, they usually died very young because, they worked really hard and they never really owned the land or anything.
Yeah, there's no such thing as private property.
Yeah.
That's a totally alien concept to them.
Okay, so the rise of sovereignty, economic growth, and crisis. Commercial revolution changed the way people lived and conducted in the Middle Ages. Over time, lords had to draw in more money for their land holding because of the rising cost of war, so they had to make up new ways to collect money. Some let their accept their money from their vassals in place of military services. Some lords allowed free people to set up towns in their land for the fee under the royal charter. Towns began to spring up across Europe and were centers of trade and freedom that tested the limits of federalism. So they didn't really get along with the lords because they had to pay them for protection and to use their roads and rivers and stuff like that. 2 events shocked the feudal system and undermined it into the claim of power. In the 1340s, the Black Plague killed over 1/3 of the population in Western Europe. Its effects changed the economic situation that supported federalism. After this, the lords were actually asking the people that dare survive for the same amount of work that they used to do before everybody was like, they had more people before the plague. So they started asking for like more money and benefits. In England, Wat Tyler led a peasant revolt in 1381. Tyler's rebellion stands as one of the several events that signed the coming end of federalism. The second shock was the Protestant Reformation in the early 1500s. The Roman Catholic Church coexisted with the federal system and enjoyed its own sovereignty centered on the Pope. The Protestant Reformations challenged the authority of the Pope. Fighting broke out between Catholics and Protestants. There was soon an authority source and decision-making to resolve religious disagreements. Lords aligned themselves with different religious groups. Neighboring towns and regions chose opposite sides and went to war. Peace of Westphalia. The 30-year war ended with a series of treaties collectively known as the Peace of Westphalia. Those landmark agreements marked the end of federalism and the beginning of modern nation-state system. From the 17th century onwards, sovereignty would be identified with leaders of states with clearly defined boundaries.
So you're saying that this was a transition from just feudal states with, lords and lesser lords to now you have identification based off a geographical region. So now I'm France, or I'm England, or I'm Russia, or I'm Denmark. Now the birth of the nation state.
Well, it's because with the feudal system, the borders, they weren't really clear, they were blurry and often nobody paid attention to them.
So legitimate government, and then legitimacy is the popular acceptance of an authority. And then there's 3 forms of legitimacy. And then the first one is tradition. So people accept a certain form of government because the society has always been governed that way. And then the second one is personality, and that one, a person with strong leadership skills comes within, gets public support because of their popularity or whatnot. And then the last one is for government to bind themselves to rules guided by sound decision-making and principles. And then an example is constitutional government, like how we have here.
So we don't value any politician above the rule of law, right? Or do we?
Yeah,
Yeah, what?
we do.
For what? Yeah, so I'm asking, she said in the constitutional government like we have, so I'm asking, so do we view individuals as being able to call the shots, or is it the rule of law that calls the shots?
It's kind of both, yeah. It's
How
like
so?
with the Constitution, you have to follow it and stuff. But then it's people choose it too, kind of popularity. And then because alright, never.
Well, let me ask
We
you,
had leadership for the president, and then we had the constitution, for the both.
so who's above whom? Is the president above the Constitution,
No,
or is the Constitution above the president? What is it?
The supreme law.
What is the Supreme
The
Law?
constitution.
Constitution. So the Constitution has more authority than the president or Congress?
Yes.
Yeah.
But
Sure.
this is a combination of both.
No, I'm just asking, who has supremacy?
The constitution.
You sure, I think?
Yeah. It's a Constitution.
Because even the president and Congress, they still have to obey the rules. Just because they have a certain position doesn't mean that they get the right to like break the laws.
Okay, so the ultimate authority is the Constitution.
Yeah.
Yes, and if the people don't like the existing Constitution, as we've learned in previous chapters, what can they do? Amendments, right? Then you can formally change or abridge or do that. So, yeah, I mean, as much as that's what sets us apart from type 2 that you just covered. Type 2, it's all about what? Charisma, how you interact with the people, the Fidel Castros. Yeah. Oh, I really like you. I mean, you're awesome. I mean, you got the style, you got the ability to communicate, you're so wonderful. But no, in our country, that may be great on the football field, it may be great on the runway, but in our view, the most important thing is principles. And principles as we've embedded them in our what? Constitution, the rule of law. Theoretically, we're what? We're all equal under the law. It's just so different from a feudal society. Can you see where we try to extricate ourselves from? We don't want to be in this hierarchical structure. We don't like that. Isaiah is just as good as Sergio, is just as good as Lupe, is just as good as Mr. Rogers, is just as good as Miss Sally, is just as good as Jim Costa, right?
Okay, so legitimacy in sovereign states. So as the feudal system gave way to sovereign states, leaders such as kings and queens became the leaders of legitimate government. So like before, kings and queens are like monarchs or whatever, they applied the law. But now with sovereignty, they gain the right to make law, not just apply it.
Mercantilism, trade and wealth brought newfound power to merchants and landowners, and monarchies adopted mercantilism to control and profit from that situation. Mercantilism was an economic and political theory emphasizing money as a chief source of wealth. So in this system, like money meant everything. And the New World. The mercantilist system expanded when European explorers reached the Western Hemisphere. Their explorations opened new opportunities, but few merchants had the power or the money to take advantages of the new circumstances. Only kings had the power to bring soldiers and money to places. The company system allowed monarchs to tap new sources of wealth from distant gold and silver mines and from far-flung trade. Great Britain colonized present-day Ghana, calling it the Gold Coast to secure its precious metals. Because gold and silver and like money, that meant wealth. And in this system, that's kind of like the most important part.
And that's critical. I think you got to the heart of mercantilism, which is the mother country gets as much gold and silver as it can. And in return, it's almost like an economic system that's employing the old feudal system, because now you have all these colonies, and these colonies would be like the lesser vassals and serfs, because they provide the mother country with raw materials. The mother country turns them into finished goods, and then what? Sells them back to the colonies.
Because they believe that they should export more than what they import, so that they can make more money. And that's like
at the expense of
other colonies,
right?
Lesser people.
So we as the colonies, we not only resented the political structure, we resented the economic structure, which is why we fully embraced in 1776 not only the Declaration of Independence, but we also embraced the Wealth of Nations, written by Adam Smith, where what? Only the consumer and the producer to decide what is produced, how much is produced, and who gets to consume what is produced. Can you see the genesis of our nation? It's both based on political and economic freedom.
Okay, and the last slide is just the works cited page. And there's just the sources that we use for the information in the presentation and the book and 2 websites. And that's it for section 1.